everyone, it's Kelly Hoey, author of Build Your Dream Network, and I am so thrilled. I'm here in New York. Lindsey Tramuta is there in Paris, and we're going to have a conversation on her new book. For those who don't know Lindsey, she is a New York Times, CNN Traveler, Fortune writer. She's the author of the book, The New Paris, which I highly recommend, though someone walked off with my copy, so I need to get another copy of The New Paris. They were going to Paris. It was before, like, we could, when we could still travel, they were going to Paris. I had to give it to them. And they haven't returned it, so I'll get a new one. And she's the author of an upcoming book, or has it have been released?
No, soon. July 7th.
Woohoo! Okay. The New Parisienne, and you're a Philly-born gal. You now reside in Paris, France. So, while I wait for my copy, I pre-ordered, while I wait for my copy of your book, tell us about the book, why this topic, why'd you feel the need to write this book, The New Parisienne?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is super cool. And I love that you and I got to meet in Europe, of all places, right? So that's, you're very much a globetrotter. The first book really started or was sparked by a feeling of frustration with the storytelling around Paris and the way that it's always sort of framed in a certain way, very much attached to history, without ever looking at it as an innovative or modern city. And in a similar way, I was frustrated by the same types of storytelling and very reductive narratives that are around women in Paris. Arguably there's a stereotype about men here as well, but the one that feels most egregious and most jarring to me is the one that surrounds women. And part of that has to do with, representations in popular culture, since Jean-Jacques Rousseau's time. So we're talking about the 18th century, and then how that evolved and became, part of what made the Parisienne, like the city she inhabits, into a brand. And, as soon as you have a brand, you have, symbols, and you have fantasy, and you have all sorts of images that come to mind when you think of it or her. And unfortunately, they don't represent a big chunk of the population. And I think it puts a lot of unreasonable pressure on women who don't fit into this mold. So they could be women who are in New York, they could be in South Africa, they could be in South America. It doesn't matter. Anybody who's sort of looking to Paris to set a certain ambition or aspiration will see this woman and think that that's somehow the goal.
Yeah. And
it's a really problematic thing to do to women in general, and also to put on other women.
Yes. Because I want to say our stereotypes of the chic woman in Paris, it's like nerve-wracking for the best of us. But if that's all she is, that's a little bit limiting and shallow. So who is she if she's not, fill in the blank, if she's not Brigitte Bardot, if she is not, like, who is this new Parisian?
Well, and just to clarify, the word new isn't meant to suggest that she has never existed. She's always been here. She just hasn't been, presented in this way, or given the attention she deserves. So she might be an activist like Rocaille Diallo, who's sort of like, leading the charge in anti-racism in France. It might be the mayor of Paris, who has had, remarkable impact, palpable impact on the city. But it could also be someone who's worked in news, like Ariane Bernard. It could be Dr. Hatem, who owns, she's an OBGYN who founded a family justice center just outside of Paris. Or it could be Elena Rossini, a filmmaker who does activism through her work. So she's also not necessarily French-born. She might be American. She might be from the suburbs of Paris. She might be Moroccan or Lebanese. And that's really reflective of the actual diversity that's here. And it's not to say that, it's about checking boxes or, highlighting diversity for the sake of diversity, but really to say, there's a real problem in the way women are marketed out of this city as part of like the marketing of Paris as a whole, because it's not realistic. I mean, the sort of Inès de la Fressange or Caroline de Maigret, some of these women who have either a sort of very affluent and like prim and proper and chic aesthetic, or are very sort of like edgy and seductive. All of that. I mean, it's not that they don't exist. It's that they are perhaps, I don't know, less than 5% of the population.
Right.
And they might be isolated in one particular neighborhood. So it's not to say that it's untrue. It's that it's incomplete.
Yeah, that's such a good word. And thank you for bringing up Elena. For those who know me, know her well. She's a featured interview in Build Your Dream Network and has been on my podcast and is a dear mutual friend of both of ours.
Yes.
So your first book, you've named some names already. I want you to dive in a little deeper. Your first book focused on change makers who are shaking up Paris. Just makes me salivate thinking of all the people like, oh my God. Anyway, so who are some of the women, like you mentioned some names, can you, who are some of these women who are transforming Paris and why'd you pick that person, or, why them, and what was it about them that you're like, wow, we need to, as we change the dimension on who these women are and their impact, people need to know about this person.
Right. So aside from the women I've just mentioned, who are all featured in some way in the book, you have women like Alice Cabaret, who is an urban planner, and she has her own studio and works on rehabilitation projects in the city. But what was interesting about her is she's actually one of few women in the book who were actually born and raised in Paris, like in the heart of Paris, but spent 4 to 5 years working in Johannesburg on some really interesting architectural and urban renewal projects. And so I thought what was fascinating about her is that experience combined with coming back into Paris and sort of looking at the city in a new way, given what she learned from being in South Africa, which is a very different context. So, having a discussion with her about some of the projects she worked on and is, by now that we're 2020, hopefully some of those projects are actually coming to a close. Then let's see, you have Amélie Vienne, who's a jewelry designer who grew up in sort of like farmland Champagne region, and who, is kind of like developed this love for fine jewelry and sort of like the artisanry of making jewelry later in life. I mean, that's to say she didn't go to college for that, and managed to win awards in the city for, craftsmanship. So she's really interesting also because she's gone to Japan to represent sort of the arts and crafts and just artisan sort of industries in general from France. So, there's this like relationship between Japan and France that's, unable to be broken. They sort of look at each other with this like mutual respect that no other two countries, I think, managed to hold. And anyway, so she's represented France in Japan for this whole, love of artisan works.
And it is sort of interesting. So you used to say that always have this impression, maybe with France, but maybe it's with Europe, that, there's sort of, you get at an early age sort of on a conveyor belt of where you go with your career, and some things that would be unattainable if you weren't, on that conveyor belt and on that track early. So to switch to go into fine jewelry later, like this is really like kind of myth busting for me.
Yeah. I mean, she's definitely someone who, I mean, she wasn't, she's, I guess maybe she's under 40. So it's not, she hasn't done a mid-career shift, but she did enter the field later than, a French person would have normally. And that's because of, certain family issues that we talk about in the book, certain, experiences that delayed that journey a bit. But there are other women who, actually there are 2 women in food and publishing who are actually a married couple and who do, who run a really cool food business together in pastry. Both women had sort of other ideas about their futures. And one of them actually worked in politics before and didn't actually go into sort of the magazine and food world until she was in her mid 40s.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was quite a late shift. I mean, she was really, planning to have a long, full career in politics and or political consulting. So, there are things that happen here that, make you remember that it isn't impossible. It is hard. It is definitely harder than in a country like the US. But I think we're finally reaching a time when, as enough people have gone through it and shown that it's possible, then other people feel sort of more comfortable making big shifts. And so actually that was a big part of the first book too, sort of these people who have gone into, leaving finance careers or leaving unfulfilling jobs to pursue, their love of soap making or whatever it is, and that was a real one.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, and thank you for raising this and talking about it a little bit more, because we have such an expectation from our North American perspective that, oh, well, you just go and do something else, you throw away that Wall Street career and you become whatever, and not realizing somewhere else this is not as easy, and not as easy also because society or the myths or the stereotypes or the structures haven't allowed that kind of change to happen.
No, that's entirely true. I mean, even though there's a lot of support and services for people who do want to go into different fields here, you end up potentially hitting a barrier once you've finished, let's say, some sort of a training program, and then you're going to, enter the working world, and then you're getting age discrimination, or you're getting, blocked in another way. So it is a societal shift that needs to happen. And we're slowly moving in the right direction. But, that's why a lot of people end up going freelance and sort of creating their own thing instead of going to try to shift careers and work for someone else, because that becomes, quite a bit harder. Whereas, if you create the roles yourself, it's, you can put as much energy as you want into it. And so there are definitely women who are a big part of this. In food, you see a lot of those shifts. I think because, women are already very nimble, and, juggling the crazy hours and all the moving parts of the food and beverage world. I think there are a lot of women who thrive in that environment. And so there are some women in the book who are in that space. So it's just interesting to see how the impact can be made in different areas, and it was really important to me to include different industries, to show a woman who's working in aviation, which, it's not that she's necessarily a well-known name, but she's doing something that is crucial for, in terms of leading French industry. She's also one of only, there's only 1 in 5 women who are engineers. So, trying to also make these careers visible to other women. Right. Women in the art world who are focusing on African art, things that you just don't see a lot of here, making sure we can get those stories out so that people who are also looking to Paris see that these kinds of things and these kinds of individuals and projects exist.
Right. Well, you don't want to be busting one stereotype and reinforcing another stereotype. Bust a stereotype that there's one type of woman who is, a resident of Paris, and here's the way we bust the myth that she only goes into these industries or she only takes these kinds of roles.
Exactly. And that's a common misconception. I think a lot of people, when they think of Paris, they think instantly of fashion and sort of maybe literary arts and things like that. But, there's women are everywhere. We're in all the industries.
Crazy.
Crazy. Can you believe it?
We're half the population and we can be engineers. Oh, yeah, sarcasm. Is there any other, I want to say, myths, misconceptions, stereotypes that we should be busting with respect to these women? What's your other one that you just want to completely drive the nail into?
Well, just this idea that she's this over-sexualized seductress. And what's really sad? I don't know that I talked about this in the book. I think it may have been in the interviews and it didn't quite make the cut. But someone had shared this anecdote that when she lived or visited the US or other sort of Anglo-Saxon countries, there were, some moments with other men and women. So let's say it's in the US. Yeah. So she's with her partner, or she's by herself. I can't remember, but she goes to have a meal or something with an American guy and his girlfriend, and the girlfriend didn't want her partner to be alone in the room with her because of the stereotype that, they're man-stealing temptresses, this sort of thing. And actually I've heard that from a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, that it seems like a silly stereotype, but,
it persists.
it persists, and it's really based on a lot of stories that were told about women by men many, many, many years ago. And then that stays in the sort of canon of pop cultural representations. And then we still have it today, and that informs people. You see it in often when you have a French character in an American or a British show being the one who sort of like stirs the pot and creates problems and tensions in relationships, like that's not a great image.
Right. No. And particularly damaging in terms of female relationships, like
100%. This idea that she's like this threatening figure that we need to be, keep at a healthy distance. And then also that she's necessarily white, which is like sort of the most obvious one. And yet I will tell you, there are people who come to Paris and comment afterward that they didn't realize how multicultural and cosmopolitan it was. Like they might read New York Times, they might read certain magazines that like document real goings on in Paris, but I don't think it fully enters until they see it.
Right.
And certainly, there's like the whole Paris syndrome, which pertains mostly to Japanese visitors who come to Paris and have such a psychological shock that they need therapy. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's not necessarily because of just the people, but you have like, the stereotypical bad manners, or, it's dirty, it's loud, and it doesn't necessarily fit the storybook image they've been sort of neatly packaged in Japan in the media, right? And so they come here and they're like, oh my God, where am I?
Right.
And they honestly have like psychological service offerings in Paris for these kinds of people, like people who come and experience this. It's completely bananas. But that's just to say, this is like, these stereotypes go a long way in hurting our understanding of the world,
Yeah. Wow. I've learned.
Yeah, you'll Google Paris syndrome and you're going to have a field day with that.
Next time I find myself needing a distraction, that's what I'm going to go and do. Good grief, the things I never knew. So you, girl from Philly, how'd you come to live in Paris? And what was your journey to becoming, a Parisienne?
It was quite long. I've been here for 14 years, and I studied French literature and linguistics, and that was sort of like my passion in life. It wasn't actually necessarily the French or even living here. It was really just like I was enamored with the language and sort of everything surrounding it. And then once I was here and I studied here for quite a while, that's when I was hooked on sort of like the bigger picture. But there's something about, and I'm sure everyone who lives abroad, either temporarily or, ends up spending their life living elsewhere, will probably attest to the fact that you must be running away from something, right? And when you do that, when you make that decision, and with me, I think it was just that I pursued, French linguistics and that sort of path of study because I felt like I didn't belong almost in the US. I didn't belong in this sort of like, I don't know how to describe it, like this, like a career path or a life path that necessarily like fit into some, uber American understanding of a career, the social climber, the one who wants to like, break through all the ceilings and earn tons of money, like that was of no interest to me. And so I think I always felt a little off. And then once I could throw myself into another language, you have this idea that maybe you can reinvent yourself, and maybe you can, you don't need to be burdened by those things or those pressures that, your home country puts on you. And so that's sort of why I recreated myself. Not that I'm not the same person, but, I evolved here. I evolved into the person who I was going to be here. And I think that's something I can't disconnect, from the days when I was studying and those short moments that I came here. And I mean, they really changed everything. So I would say that the journey then into sort of my career and the writing was much longer and a little bit more tedious. I went to grad school here, and then the recession hit, and, jobs were like non-existent. And, so I struggled for a number of years to figure out what that path was going to be. And then, that eventually leads to other things. And now I'm a little bit more comfortable sort of letting that, that unknown lead me and not be so panicked by it. But, when I was out of college and I hadn't really, when I was out of grad school and I hadn't really, formally started a career, and I'm looking at people back in the States who have are earning six figures or whatever, salaries that don't exist here for the most part, and I'm like, what am I doing? What did I just do?
Right.
So, you start to learn also that the definition of success, which we read in books all the time, but you have to, when you're living abroad, you have to redefine those terms anyway, because the cultural context and everything is different.
Yeah.
So, defining what success means, defining what opportunity means, and then growing into yourself. It's just, I've had to be really, really patient. And it's not always easy, but it's working out so far. We'll see. Knock on wood.
Knock wood. I was saying, so many thoughts going through my mind. I was like, I can't wait till we're actually can be in the same cities again, because a fuller conversation on career. I want to have you on my podcast. But as the girl who grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, and being like, places that, it's a beautiful part of the world. It's stunning. It's gorgeous. It's just not me. It's like, it wasn't until finally being in New York to kind of go, wow, yeah, that's right. I like big cities. I like concrete. I like that. I like this. I like this diversity. Cosmopolitan was the word you used. So anyway, so thank you for sharing all of that and redefining success and all these things. Okay, I got one last question for you. Drum roll. All right. When we can travel again.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, you travel writer. Amongst other things. Recommendation. Okay, I can travel again. I land in Paris. Where's the destination I should head to first?
The river. I mean, it sounds really easy, but the thing is, the mayor has, in the course of her term, made long stretches on both sides of the river completely free of car traffic. So they were former thoroughfares that are now completely pedestrianized. You can bike, you can sit, you can, jog, you can use an electric scooter, even though I hate them. It's like an instant way to connect with the city. And, I would say that if you manage to be on one of the first flights over, maybe you won't have to, fight through too many tourists. And also the water is super calm right now, which we rarely ever see. So I think it's a special place to be always, but especially right now. And certainly if you're planning on coming back in the near future.
Can't wait to get back. Cannot wait to.
And we'll meet for a drink down on the river.
Done. Thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you.
Author of the new Parisienne comes out July 7th. I think I keep seeing my copy's going to, they keep saying delivery around the 15th. That's why I wanted to say July 16th. Okay, there we go. So
hopefully it'll arrive sooner than that.
Yes. But maybe they've been counting on COVID delivery delays. But anyway, can't wait. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to chatting again soon.
With pleasure.